Welcome to part 1 of the menstrual cycle series. In this video, we're just going to cover sort of the basics of a functional menstrual cycle, and I put that in quotes because there are so many things that can go wrong in a menstrual cycle, and I kind of want to put an asterisk that a lot of people actually don't experience a functional or even I'd say normal menstrual cycle, and we'll cover all sort of the dysfunctional menstrual cycles in future videos, but that's why I'm putting that in quotes. But in this video, we're just going to give a general overview, including labels of each phase, roughly how long each phase is, just to give you a really basic understanding of what entirely encompasses a menstrual cycle. Because for a lot of us, when we think of menstrual cycle, we think of period, which is just really one phase of that menstrual cycle. So let's look at the entire thing now and kind of talk about what that actually looks like and what language and words and phrases you can use when talking to your doctor. If you haven't already watched my Sex Ed Anatomy Vulva Edition video, I encourage you to do so prior to this video, simply because I'm going to briefly touch on the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, and so that can just give you a little bit of background. Now, if you already have all that knowledge, great. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's start with challenging the idea that the menstrual cycle is 28 days long. This 28-day average is widely cited and used by pharmaceutical companies when structuring birth control pills. The actual average is 29 days. However, even that isn't helpful because a normal menstrual cycle can range from 24 to 35 days, varying from person to person and even cycle to cycle. So one cycle, your menstrual cycle could be 28 days, the next one could be 29, the third one can be 27, right? It can be a variant even within the same person, cycle to cycle. Now, the medical language breaks the menstrual cycle into the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. However, I break these down even further into the period phase, the yes please phase, the ovulation phase, and the meh phase. I know I pull a lot of these in quotes, and the PMS phase, all of which I'll explain throughout this video. All right, so we'll start with kind of just looking at this, this graph here, and just looking at that top where it says period, yes, please phase, ovulation, meh phase, and PMS phase. And then right underneath that, we have the follicular phase and luteal phase. Now, there's lots of things right underneath this, these headers. We will see this picture over and over and over again in the future video, so we're just going to start right at the top and just focus there. Now, day 1 of the menstrual cycle is the first day of your period. Marking day 1 can be tricky because many people may spot several days leading up to their period. This spotting is usually light and requires either nothing or at most a panty liner. Day 1 is when the day of bleeding will require you to use a menstrual product, such as a tampon, a pad, menstrual cup, period underwear. And the average length of a period phase of the menstrual cycle is 5 days. However, quote unquote normal is 2 to 7 days. So as long as your period is within that 2 to 7 is usually what the medical community considers a normal period. Now, following the period phase is what I call the yes please phase. I label this phase yes please due to the impact estrogen has on our bodies during this time. And I will go further into the hormone piece in one of the next videos. But combined with the period phase and the yes please phase, this entire chunk encompasses the follicular phase. So that's what the medical community considers the follicular phase. Now, the follicular phase begins on day 1 and ends at ovulation. And this phase has the most deviation in its length compared to any other part of the menstrual cycle. So when the menstrual cycle has that 24 to 35 day range that I mentioned earlier, most of that deviation is because of the follicular phase. And that follicular phase can range anywhere from 10 to 23 days, with the average being around 15 days. So if we break the follicular phase back down to my two phases, the period phase and the yes please phase, that would make the average period around 5 days, and then the average length of that yes please phase is about 10 days. Now, following the yes please phase, or the follicular phase, is ovulation. Now, ovulation is when the egg is released from the ovary, travels down the fallopian tube to the uterus. Ovulation itself is really only about 12 to 24 hours in its length, like the actual process of ovulation. But the phase leading up to it and including the process is about 1 to 2 days. Now, after ovulation, we enter the luteal phase, which ends on day 1 of the next cycle. I break the luteal phase down to 2 phases, the meh phase, and I'll put that in quotes too, and the PMS phase. During this phase, the hormones and the physical changes happening to the body are all in preparation for the possibility that the egg released during ovulation will become fertilized by the sperm and implant into the wall of the uterus. The luteal phase has the most predictable length of any part of the cycle, which is about 13 days. And the reason this phase is so predictable is because of the process that's happening in the ovary after that egg was released. And we'll take a closer look at that process in one of the other videos. But as I mentioned, I break this phase down into the meh phase, called that again because of how the hormones are impacting our bodies. And the meh phase is about 6 or 7 days and leads us right into the PMS phase. The PMS phase starts about a week prior to our period, and approximately 90% of people who are menstruating uninterrupted, so what that means is they're not on hormonal birth control, sort of stopping the menstrual cycle, experience PMS symptoms during this phase. And the most common PMS symptoms include mood swings, fatigue, anxiety, bloating, breast tenderness, headaches. And that's where that spotting shows up too when we talked about the very beginning of how to mark day 1. And the spotting that precedes sort of day 1 is in this PMS phase. Now, after the PMS phase, this leads us right up to day 1 of the next cycle, and everything repeats again. Now, I hope this really general overview of the menstrual cycle was helpful, and in future videos, I'm going to look at what the hormones are doing in each of these phases, how the body and the brain changes during these phases, and hopefully give you a better language and understanding of what's going on in the body during menstruation.